It was the day everything changed in Sarah Johnson's life, when she was forced to bring little Emma, age 3, to work at the Manhattan penthouse of Michael Sterling, the most feared billionaire in New York City. Sarah knew she was risking immediate termination. The house rules were crystal clear: no children allowed in the master's quarters. But that morning the daycare had closed due to an emergency, and she couldn't afford to lose even one day of pay. While nervously cleaning the main living room, praying that Mr. Sterling wouldn't return early from his board meeting, she heard a sound that froze her blood, the distinctive click of his Italian leather shoes on the marble hallway. She turned in terror and saw him, the most powerful man in America, staring directly at her daughter Emma, sitting on the Persian rug, wearing her faded pink dress and messy blonde curls, innocently playing with a broken toy she'd found somewhere. Sarah braced herself for the shouting, for immediate firing, for the end of everything. Instead, what happened in the next few minutes would forever change the lives of 3 people, revealing a secret that the billionaire had hidden from the entire world. Sarah Johnson woke up at 5 a.m. with her heart pounding. The phone call from the night before had destroyed all her plans. The daycare where she left little Emma would be closed for 3 days due to a health emergency. 3 days without pay she couldn't afford, or 3 days with Emma and nowhere to leave her. Sarah's life was a precarious balance built on split-second timing and daily sacrifices. A widow for 2 years, she worked as a housekeeper in Michael Sterling's penthouse 6 days a week, earning just enough to pay rent on the studio apartment in Queens where she lived with Emma. Every dollar was counted, every expense planned, every unexpected event a potential catastrophe. Michael Sterling wasn't an employer like the others. At 42, he had built a financial empire spanning from real estate to tech startups. He was known for his ruthlessness in business, for quick and final decisions, for absolute intolerance toward any form of inefficiency. His penthouse on the Upper East Side was a temple of perfection where every detail had to be flawless. The rules for domestic staff were ironclad. No noise when the master was home, no personal items left in sight, no children or family members who could disturb the sacred tranquility of the environment. Sarah had seen the previous housekeeper fired for receiving a call from her son during work hours. But that morning, while preparing Emma for a day she didn't know how to handle, Sarah made the riskiest decision of her life. She would bring the child to work, hide her in the service rooms, and pray that Mr. Sterling wouldn't notice. Emma, at 3 years old, was a lively and curious child, with blonde curls that seemed to have a life of their own, and blue eyes that sparkled with intelligence. That morning, when Sarah explained that she had to be very quiet and not move from the storage room, Emma nodded seriously, as if she understood the importance of the situation. The Sterling penthouse was an 18th-century mansion converted with maximum modern luxury. Carrara marble, original artwork, antique furniture, and cutting-edge technology blended in a harmony that took your breath away. Sarah knew every inch of those rooms. She had cleaned them for months with the devotion of someone who knows that a single mistake can cost you your job. That Tuesday morning, Michael had an important board meeting downtown that was supposed to last at least 3 hours. Sarah calculated she would have enough time to finish the main cleaning while keeping Emma hidden. The plan seemed to work perfectly until around 10 o'clock, when she heard the unmistakable sound of the Mercedes pulling into the private garage. Panic hit her like a wave. The meeting had ended early. Emma was playing quietly in the storage room, but Sarah knew that Michael had the habit of inspecting every corner of the penthouse upon his return. She had to move the child, but where? As she heard Michael's footsteps approaching, Sarah took Emma in her arms and carried her to the only room she knew he wouldn't inspect immediately, his private study. She gently placed her on the leather armchair and whispered for her not to move. Then she ran to pretend she was cleaning the living room, desperately hoping that fate would be on her side. But fate that day had other plans. Michael Sterling entered his penthouse with the dark mood of someone who had just discovered that the year's most important acquisition had fallen through due to a lawyer's incompetence. He had built his fortune on precision and absolute control of every variable, and when something escaped his control, his reaction was always devastating. That day, he had a packed agenda of urgent calls to make from his private study, a sacred place where no one had ever set foot except him. It was his sanctuary, the only space in the penthouse where he could be completely himself, away from the masks he had to wear in the business world. He opened the study door with the same brusque determination with which he faced every moment of his day, but stopped dead on the threshold. In his leather armchair, the $50,000 one that no one had ever sat in except him, there was a little girl. Emma looked at him with those big, curious blue eyes, without fear, as if the presence of an elegant stranger was the most normal thing in the world. She wore a pink dress that had obviously seen better days, with a small chocolate stain on the sleeve and a yellow ribbon in her slightly messy blonde curls. In her little hand, she clutched a colourful plastic toy that seemed to have lost some pieces along the way. For Michael, accustomed to the absolute silence of his home, the presence of this little intruder was shocking, but what struck him wasn't the indignation he expected to feel. What struck him was something completely different and unexpected. A sharp pain in his chest, a memory he thought he had buried forever. Emma tilted her head to the side, studying the elegant man who was staring at her in silence. Then, with the disarming simplicity of children, she smiled at him and began telling him about her toy. It wasn't a particularly deep conversation, but for Michael it was like hearing a voice from the past. The most feared billionaire in New York found himself paralyzed by a 3-year-old girl. In that moment, all the important meetings, the urgent calls, the failed acquisition, everything seemed to lose importance. There was only him and this little girl who looked at him with eyes that reminded him of something he had tried to forget for years. Meanwhile, Sarah was living the worst nightmare of her life. She had heard Michael enter the study and then silence. A silence that lasted too long to be normal. She knew she had to go check, even if it meant walking straight into immediate termination. With trembling legs, Sarah headed toward the study. The door was slightly ajar, and what she saw left her speechless. Michael Sterling, the man everyone feared, was kneeling next to the armchair where Emma sat. He wasn't shouting, he didn't seem angry. He seemed vulnerable. Emma had started telling him about her toy. A red toy car missing a wheel, explaining to him with adult seriousness that it didn't matter if it was broken, because broken things can be fixed. Michael listened to every word as if it were the most important thing in the world. Sarah didn't know whether to intervene or run away. She had prepared 1,000 excuses for this situation, but none seemed adequate for what she was seeing. The most powerful man in America was playing with her daughter, and for the first time since she'd known him, he seemed human. It was Emma who broke the spell. Seeing Sarah at the door, she ran to her with the radiant smile she reserved for her mommy. Michael stood up slowly, and Sarah prepared for the worst. But what happened next was something she could never have imagined. Instead of yelling or firing her, Michael looked into her eyes with an expression she had never seen before, a tenderness she didn't know existed in that man of ice. And in that moment, Sarah understood that she was about to discover a secret that Michael Sterling had hidden from the entire world. Michael couldn't take his eyes off Emma. Every gesture, every word, every laugh awakened memories in him that he had buried in a dark corner of his soul. It wasn't just the presence of a child that disturbed him. It was the way this specific child looked at him, as if she could see through the armor of cold efficiency he had built over the years. He sat on the floor next to Emma, not caring that his $2,000 suit was getting wrinkled. With hands that trembled slightly, he took the child's broken toy and began examining it as if it were an archaeological artifact of priceless value. Emma, with the naturalness typical of children, began telling him the story of the little car. It had belonged to her daddy when he was little, then it became hers, but it broke when it fell down the stairs. She explained to Michael that her mommy had told her that daddy was now in the stars, and that she hoped that from up there he could see that she was taking care of his toy, even though it was broken. At those words, something broke in Michael's chest. His breathing became irregular, his eyes filled with tears he hadn't shed in years. Sarah saw him pale and stepped forward, worried that he was feeling sick. But Michael raised a hand to stop her, never taking his eyes off Emma. With a hoarse voice, he began to speak. He told of when he too was 3 years old and played with a red toy car identical to Emma's. He told of his father, who had given it to him for his birthday and taught him that toys, like people, become even more precious when they're a little damaged because it means they've been loved. Emma listened with those big, attentive eyes, nodding seriously as if she perfectly understood the weight of those words. Then, with a gesture that made Sarah hold her breath, she got up and hugged Michael, a spontaneous, innocent hug.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Full of that pure tenderness that only children know how to give, Michael remained motionless for a moment, as if he didn't know how to react to that human contact. Then, slowly, he returned the hug, and Sarah saw a tear slide down his face. In that moment, Michael began telling his true story, a story he had never shared with anyone. He told of when he lost his parents in a plane crash at just 8 years old, of how he found himself alone in the world with only a mountain of money and no one who truly loved him. He told of how he had built his financial empire to fill the void he had inside, of how he had chosen not to have a family because he was afraid of losing the people he loved again. He told of how, every night, he fell asleep in that enormous penthouse, feeling lonelier than when he was a child. Sarah listened without saying a word, realizing she was witnessing something extraordinary, the birth of a humanity that Michael had hidden for decades. Emma, unaware of the weight of the moment, continued playing with her toy car, occasionally looking up to smile at Michael. When Michael finished speaking, a different silence fell over the room. No longer the cold, empty silence that always characterized that house, but a silence full of understanding and possibilities. Emma broke that silence with one of her childlike observations. She told Michael that even if he felt lonely, now he had her and her mommy, and that if he wanted, they could be his family, because families aren't made only with blood, but also with love. Michael looked at Sarah, then at Emma, then at Sarah again. And for the first time in 30 years, the richest man in New York realized that all his billions weren't worth as much as this child's smile and the kindness of this woman who had had the courage to risk everything for love of her daughter. In that moment, he made a decision that would change all three of their lives. Michael's decision came like a bolt from the blue. He no longer wanted Emma to be hidden. He wanted her to come to work with Sarah every day, for this house to become a place where a child could grow and laugh. The following days were surreal. The penthouse gradually transformed into something completely different. Michael had a room prepared for Emma, but the child preferred to follow her mommy, chatting with him every time she encountered him. The change in Michael was evident. His colleagues noticed he was less brusque, more patient, almost smiling. Emma had the effect of a little sun on the penthouse. Her laughter filled the empty corners. Her innocent questions made Michael reflect on aspects of life he had forgotten. A week later, Michael offered Sarah a completely new contract. No longer a housekeeper, but house manager with triple salary, apartment in the penthouse for her and Emma, and full corporate benefits. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. For years, she had struggled to make ends meet, and now she was being offered financial security she had never dreamed of. But in Michael's eyes, she saw something that went beyond generosity, a need, a vulnerability he had never shown before. That evening, while Emma slept in her new fairy tale room, Sarah and Michael talked in the main living room. For the first time, They spoke as two human beings, not as employer and employee. Michael confessed to her that Emma's presence had filled a void he didn't know he had, and that Sarah's kindness had shown him a richness that his millions couldn't buy. It was Emma, with her disarming innocence, who said what neither of them dared to express. The next morning, during breakfast, she looked at Michael and asked if he wanted to marry her mommy, because according to her, they already made a beautiful family. The silence that followed was charged with tension, hope, and possibilities. Michael realized that the heart cannot be commanded like a corporation. Emma's question hung in the air. Michael and Sarah looked at each other, both aware that the answer would determine the course of their lives. Michael knelt beside Emma and explained that getting married was something important that required time. But he promised her that whatever happened, she would always be special to him, and he would always take care of her and her mommy. The following weeks were a period of discovery. Michael learned what it meant to have a family routine. Breakfast together, evenings spent reading fairy tales, weekends in Central Park instead of at the office. Emma had the effect of transforming everything. The child who had always shown precocious maturity had begun to behave like a real 3-year-old. She laughed more, played carefreely, had started calling Michael Uncle Mike naturally. One evening, while Michael was reading a story to Emma, the child interrupted him to tell him she was happy that her mommy wasn't sad in the evenings anymore, and that he didn't seem like that angry man from before either. That night, Michael and Sarah found themselves talking in the living room. Michael confessed that he had never believed he could be happy until she and Emma entered his life. Sarah confessed to him that she had begun to feel emotions that went beyond gratitude. When Michael took her hand, they both knew they were crossing a threshold from which there was no return. The kiss that followed was sweet and full of promises. Their moment was interrupted by Emma's little voice calling them because of a bad dream. When they reached her and saw her seeking comfort in both their arms, they understood that they were already a family in the truest sense of the word. 2 years after that Tuesday morning that had changed everything, the sterling penthouse was unrecognizable, not in its precious marbles or artwork, but in the soul of the place. Where once a mausoleum-like silence reigned, now echoed the laughter of Emma, now 5 years old, running through the hallways chased by Michael in one of their daily tickle battles. The wedding had been celebrated in the penthouse's rooftop garden, an intimate ceremony with only their closest friends. Emma had served as flower girl, proud of her pink dress and the important task of carrying the rings. During the ceremony, she had commented aloud that now she could officially call Michael Daddy, bringing smiles and tears to all the guests. Michael had discovered he was born to be a father. Despite having no experience with children, he had a natural instinct that guided him. He read stories to Emma every night, took her to Central Park every Sunday, had transformed part of the penthouse into a playroom that rivaled the best daycare centers in the city. Emma had transformed Michael into a completely different man. His employees were still shocked to see their boss arrive at the office with messy hair because Emma had insisted on styling it, or interrupt important meetings to answer her calls from the toy phone. Sarah had found her perfect place in the world. She was no longer the housekeeper who lived in terror of losing her job, but the wife of one of the most influential men in America, and the mother of a child growing up surrounded by love. She had also begun managing the Sterling family's charitable activities, discovering she had a natural talent for helping families in difficulty. The Emma's Dreams Foundation that Michael had created in honor of his daughter helped single mothers and children in difficult situations. Sarah personally handled each case, bringing her life experience and understanding of real hardships. But the real magic was in the daily routine. The breakfasts where Emma told about her dreams from the night, increasingly fantastic. The evenings where Michael completely forgot about work to build block castles. The weekends spent together discovering new places, always from the enchanted perspective of a 5-year-old. One evening, while they were having dinner together, Emma made an announcement that surprised them both. She said she had a special wish. She wanted a little brother or sister. She explained that she was happy being an only child, but thought Michael was so good at being a daddy that they should give another child the chance to have such a special father. 6 months later, Sarah announced she was pregnant. Michael's joy was uncontainable. At 45, he was about to become a father for the first time biologically, but he had felt like a father for years thanks to Emma. Little James was born on a radiant spring day. Emma was the first to hold him after his parents, whispering in his ear that she would be the best big sister in the world. Looking at his wife with the newborn in her arms and Emma singing a lullaby to her little brother, Michael realized how empty his world had been before. All his business successes, all the billions earned, nothing came close to the happiness he felt in that moment. That evening, while Sarah nursed James and Emma slept peacefully, Michael sat in his study, the same one where he had first met Emma. On the wall, he had hung the photo of that first breakfast together when they were still 3 strangers learning to know each other. He thought back to that Tuesday morning 2 years earlier, when Sarah had arrived, terrified with Emma, hidden away. If someone had told him that this rule violation would lead to the most beautiful thing in his life, he never would have believed it. But life has its own way of taking you by the hand and leading you exactly where you need to be. Sometimes all it takes is a 3-year-old girl with a broken toy and a heart full of love to completely change a family's destiny. Michael smiled, looking out the window, where the garden was illuminated by the moon. Tomorrow, Emma would want to play soccer, James would make his first smiles, and Sarah would continue to be the heart that held this wonderful family together. The richest man in New York had finally understood what it meant to be truly wealthy, and it had nothing to do with money. If you believe true love can be born in the most unexpected ways, comment which moment of the story touched you most. Share to inspire those who still believe in happy endings and families of the heart. Subscribe for more stories of love, family, and second chances. Sometimes all it takes is one brave little girl to open the most guarded heart in the world. Sometimes the strictest rules break in the face of love's innocence. And sometimes the most beautiful family is born when you least expect it in the most unlikely place.